Thank you all for joining us for this session. Angel Flight West has been the beneficiary of a practicum from the MSBA program at UC Davis for 3 years now. And that is thanks to our relationship with a longtime pilot, frequent flying pilot and professor at UC Davis, Sanjay Saigal. So I want to thank him for setting up this relationship, which has been a terrific benefit for Angel Flight West over the years. And basically what it is it's kind of like a consulting project that the students do as though they were consultants. And since they're studying data science, it's always been focused on data science. It's been a great benefit for Angel Flight West. I want to also thank the students for their hard work. I think you'll see the result of how much they've put into this program since they started in the fall. And then they'll be continuing until the end of their school year. So they're going to give you their presentation. I encourage them to try to be detailed and technical and a little bit wonky. So be prepared for that. I hope you enjoy that. And if you would like to ask any questions, please type them into the chat throughout the presentation. And then I will kind of, at the end of the session, pick out some questions for them to field. So unless you have anything you'd like to add, Sanjay, I'll turn it over to the students.
No, I think now our third batch, actually it's a fourth batch of students who have been working with Angel Flight. Last year, we had 2 batches, 2 separate teams working. So we have been very, very blessed to have this opportunity for the students to make their contributions to making Angel Flight better. And I feel especially proud about this year because I have been a completely out of circulation, I guess, and not flying any missions at all. So I'm very excited to hear what the students have to say. Thanks again.
All right, thank you, Stefan and Sanjay. I almost don't even need to introduce us anymore now that we have such elaborate intro from both of you. So thank you for all your mentorship so far. My name is Jessica. I'm the project manager currently for the Practicum Project, and my colleague Lance and I will be presenting some of our work done this year. We also have the rest of the team with us today to answer any questions at the end. So let's just get into it and show you some of the great work that we've been doing. All right, so as you heard from Sanjay and Stefan, the UC Davis MSBA is a 1-year degree program that develops data scientists and marketing and business professionals. And the practicum allows us to put those skills to practical use in real life business cases. And so what the practicum does is pairs up students with business partners, some for-profit, some non-for-profit. So this could include Mandavi Center, Court Animal Shelter, or pack size, or public storage even. And as I mentioned, we are currently the 4th team to be working on a project with Angel Flight in 3 years. You can see some of the great projects that the past couple years have been tackling, whether that's optimizing the request intake funnel or doing analysis on pilot supply. And something that we're going to be working on this year that's been informing our work so far is predicting cancellations. And so let's sort of explore what exactly that means and why we want to do that. So why do we want to predict cancellations? This seems to be something that affects us every day and is inevitable. Well, as you can see from this map, which is just the upcoming missions map on Angel Flight's website, you have a variety of different flights, whether that's red, unfilled ones, green, ones that have been filled, or blue, which have been thankfully partnered with our commercial airline partners. Every green flight is obviously a win for Angel Flight because we're able to provide our services to those who need it, essentially increasing our flight count to ascend to 8,000. But consider all of the red lines here. So each red line represents a flight that is not filled. And if we're lucky, we're able to fill one of these flights with a pilot who has the time and the resources to make that trip. But what about the flights that never get filled? Obviously, these are a reality of what Angel Flight does. Sometimes they must be canceled because there's just simply no one who signs up, and sometimes they just must be canceled because of the weather. But ultimately, these do have an impact, of course, on everyone involved, passengers, requesters, and pilots. Obviously, on passengers, this means that they either can't get to where they need to be, or they need to reschedule their appointment or make an alternate arrangement. For requesters, what does this mean? This means they have decreased confidence in Angel Flight's ability to service our patients. And we'll see in a minute exactly the quantitative impact that has. And on pilots, we have been able to talk to some pilots who are generous enough to give us their time. And canceling can be a stressful thing. It may be associated with guilt. And those who are able to pick up flights are often contacted 2 days before departure. And that's simply not enough time to make the appropriate arrangements. So how much exactly of a problem is this? So far, it's been anecdotal, but thankfully with our skills, we've been able to do some very light analysis on how much of a problem this is. So take, for example, this chart is mission legs in 2019. And this blue line represents the percentage of mission legs that had to be canceled because of Angel Flight not having a pilot or because of the weather. And so the average is around 22% for 2019. Now, this line has been creeping down year by year, but unfortunately, it's enough of a problem still to impact business, the organization. And so really, our goal is to bring this as close to zero as possible, using what we hope will be a system that could predict whether or not a flight can be canceled. So as I mentioned earlier, this has an impact on requesters and how they envision Angel Flight's reliability and ability to serve passengers. But is this really a problem? Well, when Angel Flight needs to cancel a flight, of course, the agency has less confidence in Angel Flight, and they may make less requests in the future. From looking at the data, it's not that an agency will stop requesting necessarily, but we have noticed an interesting trend. For agencies that make their first requests and those were canceled, on average, their lifetime amount of requests is around 14, which is still a lot, but compare that to when their first request is not canceled. That number jumps up to 20. So consider adding 6 requests to every agency that is able to partner with Angel Flight. Given how many agencies we work with, that is truly a large number of requests that could be made. And of course, more requests means more passengers that can be served and more time that you can donate to help these passengers get to where they need to be. And so what is our solution? Well, Stefan and Anne have been graciously working with UC Davis to develop models that could hopefully predict the outcome of a future flight. Let's say you have a flight that's scheduled to leave for a month. There are characteristics to each flight, whether that's passenger information, airport information, baggage and weight, location. Could we use this data to predict whether or not it will be canceled because of the weather, because no one will sign up for it, or if it will truly be able to get off the ground and get the passenger to where they need to be? What are the benefits of this? Well, it really would solve everything that I mentioned before. A passenger would be able to make their appointment. They wouldn't have to be canceled on. But say, for example, our models are able to predict something that has a high risk of being canceled on in a week because of no pilot or because of the weather. Well, at the very least, we could give them that advanced notice so that they could develop a plan in case they need to make alternate arrangements, which is going to be a huge step up in terms of their comfort level, the amount of reassurance they have, especially if they're a first-time flyer. Now for pilots, this is still a benefit to us because for flights with no signups or having a high probability of no signups, we can hopefully give them a way to arrange for that much earlier than 2 days before departure, which gives you more time and essentially make your lives less stressful as well. And of course, for requesters, early prediction and being able to fill or provide a backup for every flight that needs to be canceled does essentially increase their reliability and confidence in Angel Flight, and thus more requests in the future. So that being said, we're going to get a little bit technical, but hopefully not in a way that'll go over everyone's heads, and talk about the modeling we've worked on in the past 5 months. And Lance is going to take over and tell you how they work and what our steps for the future are.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jessica. Hello, this is Lance. I'm also extremely honored and excited to be here. I'm going to get down to the nitty-gritty of the 3 models we have worked on so far. Well, we gave them very straightforward names. First model, easy to fill, predicts flights that get filled with little to no intervention. For example, from Los Angeles to the Bay Area, it's pretty easy to fill because there are a lot of pilots and it's basically a straight line. Our second model, no pilot cancellation, predicts the flights that have a higher chance of no pilots wanting to sign up. After all, we tend to sign up for missions we are, pretty familiar with and that are not super complicated. Our last model is the weather cancellation model, which uses historical cancellation data to analyze the risk of a flight being canceled by weather. Life is all about making plans. When your plan fails, you make a backup plan. This is exactly what our models are trying to do. Flight cancellations are inevitable. It happens, and it happens all the time. And most of the time when it happens so suddenly that you don't have time to make a backup plan. However, if we are able to produce an early signal, it could give the coordinators more time to, look for another pilot, search for another airport, or at the bare minimum, purchase a refundable commercial ticket. So at the end of the day, the passenger still have a chance to go to the treatment and receive whatever medication they need on time. Our first and second models are all about finding out the most significant factors of a flight. And later, we use these factors to predict if a flight can successfully take off. Now, there are a lot of things that can impact a mission, a flight, objectively, subjectively. But the top 5 general factors are supply, which means the number of active pilots in the area, and demand, number of Angel Flight West missions in an area over the past 2 weeks, and weight, which means the combined weight of the passengers and their belongings, and distance, the total combined distance of all mission legs in the whole mission, and days, which you can also interpret as lead time to the flight actually taking off. Our third model is our most open-ended challenge. Our predecessors for the past 2 years have been trying to use the weather forecast to prevent cancellation. But we have a problem here. No matter how hard we try, we can't get any more accurate forecasts above and beyond 48 hours before the flight. So we decided to look at the historical data instead. We do it by looking at the weather from the origin and destination airports, and we put all the airports into clusters. There are hundreds of airports you guys fly by on a daily basis. Many of them can be grouped by geographical patterns and similarities. For example, their latitude, longitude, elevation, and how far is it to the ocean, how far is it to a mountain ridge. Here, you can see a visualization of, hundreds of airports. If they have the same color, it means that we can expect weather to have a similar impact over them. For example, if you take off from, let's say, Reading, it's pretty much the same as taking off from Sacramento. Although these two cities are relatively far, they have similar geographic patterns. However, if you're taking off from San Francisco, although it's very close to Sacramento, the weather is a completely different story because they have different geographical patterns. We are currently planning to integrate our models into the workflow of Angel Flight West. As you can see, at any given time, whenever there's a risk being identified by our model, it will encourage coordinators to caution the passenger. It is eventually going to help Angel Flight West to be even more communicative way before a mission ever start, instead of waiting for the mission to start. I just want to reiterate that our models are not meant to replace the pilot's judgment of a mission. A pilot's judgment is above all, the word of God. But what we want to do here is we want to give the flight coordinators and passengers an early warning of something out of our control may or may not happen. And we believe this feature, this early signal, is going to make future passengers feel even more secure and safe about Angel Flight West missions, and more of them will eventually sign up. So even if something bad may happen, we have more time to find a way to get the passenger to the destination on time.
Thanks, Lance. So that was just a brief overview of what our models do and a very basic look at how they work. So thankfully, we have the benefit of working with Angel Flight until June, and we're hoping to make the most of that time. So our model is currently in a testing process, and for the next couple of months, we'll be making sure that the model is performing as expected. What that means is making sure that their predictions line up with the reality. So far, it's been in staging for about a month. So we're hoping with a month or so of additional data, we could confidently say whether or not our models need to be retrained or if they're good enough to start going live. We're also currently working on an interface that coordinators can work with directly in Zendesk, which is what they currently use in their day-to-day operations. And once we figure out the specificity and timing of our process in progress, we'll be able to go live and work with coordinators to make this a process that is robust to error and can truly be workable on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately, while we're only able to help out Angel Flight for less than a year more, we're hoping that this can lay a really good foundation for future teams to build off of this and ultimately bring that cancellation rate down to 0 and just make everyone's lives easier. Looking to some other projects we could potentially work on this year, we noticed that we could use the clustering techniques that we were able to use for the weather cancellation model and see if we could look at long-term trends in lack of pilots in areas that either just don't have enough pilots compared to the number of requests we get, or just don't have enough healthcare centers, meaning that passengers have a lot more requests in those areas. So this is a project that we believe we may be able to work on in the future, which thanks to some of our team members, we've been able to get a sense of how we might be able to do that because of the clustering techniques. So I hope that was informative of who we are and what we do. Ultimately, we wouldn't have been able to do this without Stefan and or Sanjay, everyone on the coordinator team, to help us understand the workings of this great organization and what you do. And of course, thank you for all of the pilots who've been able to sit with us and tell us about your day-to-day. And of course, for everything that you do for this organization. We hope, even though we're only on for a year, we could make at least a little bit of an impact that could really help more passengers get off the ground and where they need to be. And with that, we'll take any questions.
All right, we have a couple questions here. So Lee asks or suggests that we add mechanical as a third variable in addition to the number of pilots and the weather. And so I'll take that one. I think basically mechanical is a very, very small percentage of our cancellations. And so we've essentially decided to, from a statistical perspective, ignore that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I think there is some opportunity, perhaps, if there are pilots and or aircraft that we know about that end up getting canceled a lot more due to mechanicals. I suppose there could be something, but I agree with you, Stefan, compared to the issues that we're talking about here, the lack of a pilot and weather-related stuff, that seems like a pretty minor, not necessarily that the suggestion is wrong. I think at a certain point that could be looked at, but there are sort of these gross factors that the students have been looking at right now, right?
Right. Question is, if you looked at historical weather data for origin and destination, how do you account for on-route weather?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And I think it could be something that we incorporate into the models as in case we test it and it needs more work. For example, if the accuracy isn't doing as well as we want. I think our starting place has been using some of the variables that Angel Flight collects, but certainly it could be worth looking into en route weather. I think we would just need to collect external data on that. Does that sound about right, Stefan?
Yeah, and we've looked at this in two ways. One is the airports, because we have detailed weather, as you know, from airports. They report detailed weather, and so we have that data. But we've also looked at just the routes. So we do fly a lot of routes, which makes it more complicated. But if we look at the route, then that takes into consideration really both origin, destination, and everything in between. And you'll find obviously that Seattle Spokane, as a route is prone to cancellation versus Las Vegas to LA. And that is a terrain based, I assume their cause is the terrain. So we've kind of looked at it in both ways.
I think the students can correct me if I'm wrong, but right now in its current form, the work that they're doing on the weather is really backward looking, right? It's not forward looking at all. So if there is an origin, let's say Palo Alto to Reno, perhaps all this model does right now is look at it and say how many of these flights were canceled around this time last year, roughly speaking. And there might be multiple routes, and that kind of gets baked into the model as pilots found ways to go around in the past. So one thing that perhaps can be done is actually look at the weather forecast, forward-looking weather forecast, and further sharpen this particular model. Right now, that is not the case. Right now, it's looking at historical stuff. That's entirely what it's looking at. So the route would be it's kind of baked into the probabilities in a certain sense.
So we have the question, are the models being tested right now? And one of the things I'll just mention that we haven't really touched on is last year's team worked on the two models, the easy to fill and the no pilot. And obviously we're training their data based on 2019 data and before, which was quite consistent. And then of course, 2020, we got, I'm sure you've heard of COVID. So from a modeling standpoint, as you probably know, everything is based on data in the past, training a model on that data, and then predicting the future. So this team this year has had to deal with the inconsistency of the 2020 data vis-a-vis the prior years, and to try to figure out how to train their models on a consistent set of data that would produce consistent results. And of course, we're currently testing against data that's in the COVID era, which makes this problem quite complex. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we are testing the models and trying to account for the variations in pre-COVID, post-COVID data. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think even though we are dealing with the COVID data being the test data, but I believe our first two models, easy to fill and no pilot cancellation, achieved a better precision and accuracy, both. The increment is not substantial. It's not like 10%, but we managed to get a 1 to 2% increase in the precision, which, considering the data is not the same as before, there are a lot of fluctuations and deviance. I think it's a pretty good milestone.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Bill asks, do you look at how aircraft type is correlated with weather cancellations? There may be reasons where there's more sensitivity by aircraft type.
I think the variable we looked into is kind of similar to aircraft type. I don't know if by aircraft type you are meaning how many passengers, how many people can the aircraft hold, like 4-seaters or more. But we did take into the consideration how many passengers are going on a flight, and this could be kind of related to the aircraft type, I guess, if there's no other
It's
meaning on it.
related, but only loosely. I think when you all did the analysis on the most important factors, I expect it didn't come out to be particularly significant.
It is not the top 5, but it is up there, just not top 5.
It's an interesting observation. I mean, it might be a nice little, just like a day-long or half a day-long project to just see if there is actually any difference in weather cancellation between aircraft types. I think it's a cool question. I don't know why I didn't think of it.
Yeah, if
Well,
I could
just to-
also,
Go ahead,
I'm
Jessica.
sorry, I was just going to mention that our goal for the weather cancellation model was to use geography. However, because it's backwards looking, it also takes into account all emissions between 2016 and 2020. So if something was canceled partially because of aircraft type, that technically would be included in the data. We just wouldn't be able to see, I mean, if we wanted to see if a mission was canceled because of aircraft type, it's something that we could look at. But for now, keeping the variable set down to like a lean 5 or so allows us to look just at geography and focus on that alone. But that isn't to say that the information isn't contributing to those cancellations.
Well, I think another way to look at this is, really what we're trying to build here is a tool for the coordination team to look at what's the chances of a flight filling, and so that really depends on the entire pool of our pilot base. And so on a statistically average flight, some of those are going to be taken by Big Iron, and some of them are going to be taken by Anaranka. So that's just part of the equation that the coordinators are dealing with when they're forward looking toward a flight. So sort of the pool of available flights is always kind of a part of the model in some respect.
Right. And so if the fleet is fundamentally different in one part of the country, let's say Alaska, as opposed to, let's say, California, then it's kind of being baked into the probabilities that we are forecasting, right? Is that the right way to think about it?
I would say that's a better way of stating it than what I said. Yeah.
Yet, I still find this question interesting because, I mean, it would be nice to actually, for example, have a sort of a tornado chart kind of a thing, which says by gauge, some particular things are outliers, maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting question to think about.
So Mark asks, are there any interesting or top level observations that you've noticed so far as you analyze the data?
Sure, I can take this one. I mean, there's definitely been some things that we noticed when analyzing, for example, missions before and after the COVID lockdown. So, as you all know, passenger missions were on a hold for a couple of months and then went back up. But we wanted to see if any of the variables differed between the two. And one thing that was interesting is, apart from passenger cancellations skyrocketing, of course, a lot of the other variables stayed the same. So Lance, correct me if I'm wrong, but like age, weight, their cancel rate on Angel Flight side, all these things remained the same. I think the only thing that changed was lead time. So passengers or agencies were basically making requests on a shorter amount of time on average. But we expected to see a lot more differences, and other than the passenger cancel rate, it was pretty much the same, which is good news for our modeling, because if the variables we're using has pretty equal behavior these next few months or years, then we should see the same level of accuracy as before.
So Ron asks, he's not clear on what the deliverables are and when they will be available.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as we mentioned before, we're working on something that could be implemented in Zendesk. So something that the coordinators would be able to look at. And I think, Stefan, we have sort of a prototype going on, which is a table attached to each flight ticket, which shows the probability of each risk category. So we're trying to refine that and make that a lot simpler to look at, as well as an actual decision-making process that the coordinators can use. So what that might look like is every flight would basically prompt the coordinator to do something like, and of course we have to work out the specifics, but this flight has a high likelihood of not being filled and it still doesn't have a person attached to it. So you should go and contact pilots to see if they could fill it. As well as a priority system to see the next flights upcoming in the next month or so, attached to kind of like a ranked priority of which ones should get the most attention.
Yeah, I think at a high level, we're trying to create tools for the coordination team to become more proactive. And I think in the very old days, prior to this current coordination team, we were very reactive. And it's a testament to you all, to the pilots and volunteers out there, that you filled them basically on your own, and they answered the phone when you called. So what we're trying to get to the point now is where we do the intake on a flight, and the coordinators have a tool that tells them how they should proceed with this particular flight. This one's kind of easy to fill, and so we won't put a lot of effort into front loading on this one. This one, however, is going to be difficult, so let's get to work on it right away, because that way not only do we increase the chances that we find the pilot, but that also we set the passenger's expectations and the requester's expectations appropriately, so that they're actually not disappointed if we do have to tell them that they need to execute their backup plan. So the real deliverable is some kind of an interface, some kind of a tool set for the coordinators to utilize to make their mission coordination process more proactive.
Since I'm responsible for like next year's projects, I will say something, which is, if any of you, we've never, I don't think we haven't had this many people reacting to what the students are doing, right? Stefan, I think
that's true. Yeah.
So if you have ideas for what this stuff is like for the coordination team, that's where it's supposed to have be visible and have an impact. But if anybody here, either from a partner organization or a pilot, has ideas of what we might be able to get from data, please talk to Stefan and he will talk to me. If you have any ideas of any other interesting things that you see could be extractable from the data, we would love to know. Because this one is not either patient facing or pilot facing. It isn't. It's really coordinator facing. And then the coordinators do the necessary work.
I'm sorry. And then really quickly to answer the question on when they will be available, we're tentatively aiming to have them available by April. Of course, this is going to involve a lot of learning about the technological systems involved, the coordinator process, getting up to speed on that. So, I mean, worst case scenario, we are here until June, and worst case scenario, it's the next team's business.
No, it's yours.
Okay, another possible factor could be the flexibility of the passenger and the pilot. If weather impacts a mission and the pilot and passenger are flexible, then the mission can be postponed instead of canceled. So one thing I would say about that is that part of our challenge in the modeling is that, you know, we do things in a certain way and we've done things a certain way for a long time, and those habits or patterns or whatever you call them are sort of embedded into our data. For example, the kind of thing where we set a mission date and don't ever change it. So exploring the kinds of options that you're talking about are a great idea. It's just unfortunately a little bit of a challenge from a data science standpoint because we don't have alternatives. So, well, we've had this data set where we fixed the date and didn't stick to it, and then we have another data set where we were flexible and we could compare them. So anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a good point what you said, Stefan, about it being difficult from a kind of a data perspective, because correct me if I'm wrong, but if something is postponed, I think it still shows up in the data as canceled.
Depends a little bit on the circumstance, and you know, this is another challenge for the team. By the way, I have to also commend them on the fact that they came into this project with no knowledge, not only our organization but of general aviation, and you know, they're talking about like fuel stops and weight capacity and icing and all this stuff now, like their old hats. So they've had to learn a lot about this, and I think that's part of the challenge. So are you taking
before you go there, I mean, I can sort of visualize. I mean, this is another interesting thought to follow up. I can sort of visualize an A/B test of some kind, right? I think maybe Stefan, you were hinting, or maybe it was Jessica was hinting at this. I mean, you could treat some sort of missions as let's try this, and another set of missions as okay, let's just cancel them. I suppose something could be possible, but it's a little subtle, I think.
Yeah, the data is a bit inconsistent in many ways, and over time, we've made efforts to make it more consistent, and this particular coordination team has been really great about really paying attention to the data. So they've had to kind of deal with that again from a kind of a data science standpoint.
One of the really wonderful things about working with Angel Flight is that as the team sort of finds out something, Stefan has gone and like sort of refined the data collection. And I think the data collection now, in small part, as a result of previous teams and so on, and also this team, has actually improved. So we are collecting data in some better ways to make it more usable, right? Stefan, I don't know if you'd agree or not, but that's what I felt.
Yeah, definitely. Are you taking into consideration the isolated nature of some destinations? In other words, the complexity and extra lead time needed to salvage a mission in a less well-connected area versus a big city with readily available options?
Yeah, I guess off the top of my head, any differences in kind of what you're talking about in terms of complexity and I guess big city versus a less or like a more isolated or less populous city, that information could be available in the supply and demand variables that we're using in some of the models, which looks at in that area relative to how many requests there are, how many patients there are, how many pilots are able to serve. So there's a lot of specificity to that question that, you know, gets lost, whether you're starting with an airport in Santa Monica, for example, and you need to go somewhere rural, maybe in Northern California, then it's not necessarily that that population or geographic information will be baked in, but certainly the supply and demand ratio will be. And the reason we wanted to keep this geographical for the first two models is when a passenger makes a request, often we don't necessarily know, I think that's right, Stefan, you don't know which airport you're going to yet until that's processed. So to keep it simpler allows us that flexibility. And it allows us to also kind of make guesses of the supply and demand of a potential airport rather than exact knowledge.
Yeah, I'd say one of my insights from these projects over the years has been the concept of supply and demand. So we've always thought about the supply concept, which is that if you have a large number of pilots, you should presumably have a better chance of filling the flight. And that supply ratio incorporates the idea of a remote airport with few resources, because you can either have a person flying from a populous area to the rural area or vice versa. But the demand concept is one that has been introduced in the last year or so, because we had a situation where we would look at the cancellation rates on various routes, and we would find that routes that had a lot of supply, like Las Vegas to LA, for example, had a high cancellation rate, which was counterintuitive to us. And so the demand part of it also factors into that, because those pilots also have a lot of choice of flights. And so it taps out the pool, in other words. So I think that some of these modeling techniques take into consideration some of those factors, even though they're not really considering them directly. That makes sense. And to some degree with the capability of the aircraft too, because obviously the capability of aircraft changes because some pilots will join and drop off, you know, in various airports. But that's all kind of baked in some respect to the data. So Stephen Elop says, I would think about aircraft type in a different way. The size of the pool of available aircraft is different based on season, weather, number of passengers. In poor weather, only certain types of aircraft can operate, only certain pilots can operate, etc. So it's not about the different types of aircraft in different parts of the country. It's about the suitability, of different types of aircraft depending on the weather and loading.
Yeah, I think that also ties in kind of nicely with the next question from Ray. If coordinators could use the model to predict the type of aircraft that could complete a mission, they could focus their attention in calling pilots with suitable equipment, which I think is a really compelling project that we haven't thought about. Certainly an aircraft type prediction model. To the first point, I definitely think seasonal differences in aircraft. So the weather model is also dependent on season. So the probabilities would change based on that. I think some of that information for changes in aircraft type would fit in there, but again, I think it's definitely worth, especially from the number of responses we're getting about aircraft type, looking at the, I guess, missions that get flown that are of a certain aircraft type in certain seasons than others. I do think that analysis would be possible. I think, Stefan, we have that field in the data set. it would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'd be interested in Sherry's point of view on this because the way I have thought about it, the mission coordinators are not really discriminating particularly, other than size or capacity of the aircraft. That obviously happens, but they are not really preferencing or ranking aircraft type in their outreach, anything like that. Maybe, I don't know, Sherry.
So the answer to your question is no, we haven't done a lot of that. Although more recently, we have targeted we're not doing aircraft type so much. You're right about that. Is that we're just picking them by aircraft speed. So when we pick aircraft speed, we get the turbines, the jets, and those that can maybe do the longer missions or the missions over the mountains. And that has been beneficial to us in a number of cases recently, but we don't have anything automated that helps us do that. It's just all intuitive on the part of the coordinator to know that they should do that. Is that what you're looking for, Sanjay?
Yeah. So that's right. That's right. So I think this comes down to something that I suggested before, that the team do some analysis, just retrospective analysis on whether aircraft type changes anything. Maybe it does. Maybe there's weather-related stuff. Maybe people with turbines have fewer maintenance-related breakdowns. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if putting that power in a certain sense, highlighting it for the coordinators would help. I imagine that there are some organizational issues to do with, do you really want to keep calling up somebody with the Pilatus again and again and again when there are pilots with 152s who want to do a mission once in a while too? I mean, there might be some issues related, but I think this is, at least based on the interest, it's a worthwhile line of inquiry to look at.
Yeah, and this subject has come up several times today throughout different discussions about the use of the turbines and the jets, and the use of the 172s and the Archers or whatever it might be. And they all have great value to the organization, and it's probably learning how to use that data where we can figure out where we can best utilize the pilot. So we don't want to call the pilot with a 172 for a load with 3 passengers that weighs 500 pounds that's going over the Cascades. But we do want to call on, so not necessarily pick up the phone and call. We do want to call upon the pilot that has the citation that can get up over those mountains and take that kind of a heavy load. And so we've historically left it up to the pilot to make that decision, and we have not done a lot of targeted pilot outreach to get a particular pilot for their particular aircraft. So there's room for everybody. There's room for all of those aircraft to do the job. It's just trying to figure out where we can best utilize each type. Hope that made sense. I know what I was saying in my head.
And I think that already the coordinators are doing a lot of this, sort of data number crunching in their heads, because they have a lot of institutional knowledge. And part of that is part of the goal of this project is sort of to bake a lot of that institutional knowledge into a model. But this concept of a standard operating procedure would kind of go toward this a little bit. In other words, if you say that the flight has a high risk of canceling for weather, then the coordinators would do X, Y, and Z, one of which might be to look for more capable aircraft, more capable pilots, and so forth. So that's part of the concept. Not necessarily that the model needs to predict which aircraft that is, although I do agree that I think that is a very cool idea. So let's see. Are there any routes that have been proven to be underserved? So for whatever reason, weather, terrain, no volunteers, lack of on-route facilities, et cetera, that you would turn down a request to fly in the first place? That's maybe a Sherry question.
There are a few, and those would be routes where we have like 0 to 3 or 4 pilots, and in some cases the passengers have no other option. They're just not going to get treatment without us. So we may say, look, we'll give it a try. We'll make a few calls. So, for example, if a flight was going from Eastern Montana into the Dakotas and over to Rochester, Minnesota, we might just tell those people, look, we're going to give this a try. But the odds of us finding pilots in our portion of Montana and the odds of Angel Flight Central finding pilots in the Dakotas are pretty low. So there are a few regions like that, not too many. Most of them are, I would say, in Eastern Montana, portions of Central Nevada, and Idaho and Wyoming. Just, by sheer numbers of population in those areas, they have fewer people, fewer pilots. So hope that answers your question, Tom.
I think that goes towards the idea of setting expectations too, and to some degree what the models can help with.
Absolutely.
You would set the expectation of someone who wants to fly that route, accordingly. Someone who wants to fly from Santa Maria to Santa Monica accordingly. The models are really just designed to help you do that in a more effective, more systematic way. Again, a lot of this knowledge, number crunching ability is already in our organization institutionally. Let's see. Are the tools going to be integrated in our scheduling system so the team will know real time what may need to be proactively done? I would say in an ideal world, yes. Yeah, that's the goal. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess just to elaborate on that, for now we are focusing on getting to know Zendesk a little bit better, what that user interface looks like, and seeing if we could integrate into that pretty simply. I think other technological systems, we definitely have the time to learn about them and see if they could be integrated into those as well. But I think one of the biggest challenges for the next couple of months is how to make a pretty foolproof decision-making system so that every kind of risk profile has its own unique decision to be done, and the timing associated with that as well.
Yeah, this is a product management challenge as well as a modeling challenge. In other words, you have to make the output of these models understandable and usable. So what we had after last year's team was we would provide the coordinators with a 1 or a 0 for each of these models, saying, 1 meaning yes, this is a flight that will fill easily, and then a prediction probability. And that was really obviously not very useful because it doesn't have much meaning. So now part of the idea of this year's project is to be able to take that output and put it into a meaningful, usable user interface for the coordination team. So Ray asks, are there any variables that have not been collected to date that you wish you could add for the future to enrich the value of the database?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think there's definitely been several instances where we would ask if, hey, is this being collected? And the answer is yes, or sort of, but not to the extent that it could be. So I think some of the tables that we thought were really interesting were like the plea mail and the SMS text tables. It's essentially a table of all of the messages that would be sent from the coordinators to the pilots and then the responses back. And I think it would be more valuable if that table had a more accessible way of saying whether or not that mission or that text was successful or not. And so I think that would really help with providing the models more information based on those pleas. So I think that's one example of a variable that, if data collection could give us more information on that, it would, I think, increase the value of the database. And there are certainly others. I just need to think about them.
Yeah, I do find myself often answering that question in an uncomfortable way, where they'll say, "Is that data available?" And say, "Yeah, sort of." But that's the nature of the beast. To do these models, you'd like to have 5 years, worth of data. But if we decide, oh, it'd be a great idea to be able to collect this, we'll start collecting it. We'll put that into place operationally. Oh, great, now we can wait 5 years and build a model. So.
I think the only other thing I can think, well, there's a couple that I could think of if I tried hard enough, but if we could see, like, did this person have a backup plan if this was canceled? What was that backup plan? Could we categorize that pretty neatly and use that in the models and see if, maybe this will be canceled, but if backup plan is something that we think that person is going to have, then it's less of an issue. But of course, that adds more complexity to the model, and I don't think we collect a lot of data on backup plans.
Right, we've just started doing that in the last, systematically collecting information on backup plans in the last probably year, I would say. We're coming toward the end of our time. These questions are great, and yeah, definitely reiterating that if you have ideas, we would love to hear them. We'll pass them along to Sanjay. We hope to continue this practicum in subsequent years, so the next group of students will build on the work of the past students as they have before. I think every year I continue to be impressed by not only the expertise of the students, but also their dedication and the way they throw themselves into this project. And it's just been a great benefit to Angel Flight to have their time and energy and intelligence to put towards this. So again, thanks to you all. Terrific presentation today. And we look forward to a follow-up presentation at the end of the year and getting this all integrated.
Yeah, thank you from Angel Flight to the whole UC Davis team. You guys are fantastic. Sanjay, thanks again for selecting ours. I can see by the response here of our volunteers, the respect and engagement of the level of data that's required to juggle this balancing act that we do transporting patients goes a long way to helping us do it better. So thank you very much.
Indeed, I'd just like to thank Angel Flight and everybody that at Angel Flight that works with the students. I realize this is not your day job, so you're contributing to the cause of education, and I look forward to us doing more interesting things. Digital transformation is a journey; it's not a 0-1 thing. So I think based on the first time Josh and I talked about this, which was maybe 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, we've come a long way, baby. So I think it's all very good. And the students, of course, I had to convince them that talking about random forests was not necessarily what we wanted to do in this talk. And so that they could heroically not talk about the technical details. I'm very grateful. So thank you.
All right, thank you all again, and we'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your
Thank you,
questions.
guys.
Thanks, Stefan.